I played every main Elder Scrolls game. Here's my thoughts. First off, I know I keep saying this, but wow, the growth I'm seeing in my channel is blowing my mind, and I am beyond grateful. You guys are so awesome, and I love reading all the comments and suggestions you guys are sending my way. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel if you want to support me and see more content like this. Also, at the end of this video, I'm gonna show you a few of my favorite comments from the last video I did. Anyways, let's get into it. The Elder Scrolls Arena, the very first Elder Scrolls game, came out in 1994. Right off the bat, the game throws you directly into character creation. What's cool is that you can actually select where your character comes from, and you can see what the Tamriel map looked like all the way back in 1994. It's crazy to see that the maps that they're using for the games now are the same as they were all the way back then. Also, the area you select determines your character's race. When you create your character, you have the option of generating a character's class automatically or creating one yourself. Generating a character, in my opinion, is a lot more interesting than just choosing a class. The game presents you with a series of questions, with your answers used to determine what class the game assigns you. From there, you can change your character's appearance and assign bonus points to your stats, and then you're on your way. Leveling up in this game also allows you to increase your stats, so you're completely in control of your character's overall build. When it comes to stats, it's closer to Dungeons & Dragons than it is to a modern fantasy game. This game's appearance gives me kind of Doom vibes, but with significantly more things to keep track of on the screen. The visual style is kind of a damp gray and brown, but it works for the setting. You can move your character with the arrow keys or by clicking your mouse on the edges of the screen. Jumping up and down on platforms is done automatically, including getting back up from swimming. Combat is strange. You have to hold down your right mouse button and drag the mouse in whichever direction you want to swing. It's kind of cool in a way, but also kind of hard to handle. Usually it's just weird and unresponsive, but this is also a game from 1994, so I can't get too mad at it. Using spells is just selecting a spell and clicking where you want to aim it. When you defeat enemies, you can click on them to loot them, but not every enemy has loot. You can also attempt to steal from people like the modern Elder Scrolls games, but the law is quick and merciless. If you get caught, there's no arrests. They just resort directly to murder. This game is pretty text heavy. There are Dungeons & Dragons style descriptions whenever you enter a new building though, which is really cool for atmosphere and world building. There's also a pretty modern feeling conversation window where you can talk to NPCs about various things. Sometimes they just don't like you though. I don't know if this is because I was a dark elf or if they'd say the same thing if I was another race. A fun relic from 1994 is this game's copy protection. When you exit the first dungeon, you have to answer a question from the manual. Fortunately, the manual is available online if you don't have it. One thing I have to give to this game is that the music is really good. It's got a somber, threatening fantasy atmosphere, but sometimes it gives that up for a more lighthearted affair in places like the pubs. But honestly, there's always this oppressive overtone where you never really feel safe. Well, you never feel safe anyways, but I'll get to that. Unfortunately, this game is brutally difficult. At least, for me it was. I spent a lot of time having no idea what to do, and whenever I did kinda know what to do, I was getting murdered. The game doesn't really hold your hand at all, but I think that's by design. My overall impressions of this game are that it's clunky, but I really like the atmosphere. I'll be honest, I probably won't go back and finish it, but I'm glad I finally gave it a shot. The character creation in Daggerfall is incredibly similar to the last game, but expanded by quite a bit. The game allows you to add more direct skill values like archery and running too. However, the game seemingly starts all races in the same place this time, a trend that will become common in the main games. The production value here is significantly higher. A fully voiced FMV plays at the opening of the game, which is something I find incredibly charming. The game has an actual optional tutorial that gets you acquainted with how it works, which is something that I really wish Arena had. Plus, there's an option to turn on mouse look, which makes this game feel so much better to play. Visually, this game is a huge step up from the first game. Arena's aesthetic was big, blocky, Doom-like maps, whereas Daggerfall's areas are much more geometry heavy, at least for the time. The map in this game is huge, like really huge, and weirdly, it's beautiful in kind of a primitive way. You're able to fast travel to just about anywhere, and what's cool is the cities are seamlessly just sitting on the map. Also, this game has a full day and night cycle and and seasonal cycle. I served over 200 days in prison for murder in the game, and when I came back, all the snow was gone and it was sunny and bright in Gothway Garden. In dungeons and interiors like shops, you get a whole 3D render of the map that you can look at. In towns, there's a general low detail map, but as you visit places and talk to citizens, it slowly gets filled out with information. The dialogue and conversation system in this game is so cool. You can talk to NPCs in one of 3 ways, and the way that you say things changes depending on what you choose. You can choose to speak normally, extra polite, or just be straight up blunt. It seems like the way people respond to you changes based on how you speak to them, which is awesome, and I would love to see a system like this brought back, though I imagine with the voice acting, the amount of dialogue they'd have to record would be insane. Committing crimes in this game isn't straight up murder like the first game, fortunately, unless you try to fight the guards. You're sent to court where you can either plead guilty or not guilty. Pleading guilty leads you to having to wait a certain number of in-game days to serve your sentence. Pleading not guilty can lead to things like banishment. Unfortunately, stealing is an act that is immediately punished, even if no one sees you do it. It's a shame, but I can't expect everything from the newer games to be here. This game has a cool spell creation mechanic, and in order to access it, you have to join the Mages Guild. From there, you're able to craft spells with all kinds of wacky effects, but the more powerful the spell, the higher both the gold cost and the MP cost will be. In theory, I could make a god spell that insta-kills everything, but there's no way I'd be able to cast it. Daggerfall has a lot of depth and has a ton of stuff you can do, especially for a game from 1996. There's no way I could cover it all in this video, and if you're an Elder Scrolls fan, or even just a fantasy adventure game fan, definitely check out Daggerfall. Both Arena and Daggerfall are free directly from Bethesda, and you can get it from their website, so it doesn't cost you anything to give them a try. I also highly recommend using Daggerfall Unity, which is what I use to record the footage here, which I'll link in the description too. The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind released in 2002 and was the first Elder Scrolls game to come to consoles, specifically the Xbox. Morrowind was an evolution for the series, and a lot of its DNA is still in the newer Elder Scrolls games, and it shows. For starters, let me just say that Morrowind is where the music in this series starts to go hard. In Morrowind, you begin on a boat headed to, well, Morrowind. From there, you're able to customize your character and select your class. It goes through a series of questions like in the previous entries and selects a class for you based on your answers. You also have the option of outright choosing a class, as always. A fun touch is that a couple of the questions actually seem to be from previous games. It's a nice nod to people who played them, and I like to see stuff like that. Something new in Morrowind, though, is the ability to create a class from scratch, which is pretty cool. Another new thing is the ability to choose a birth sign, which gives you extra buffs, but most of them also have a downside. So something Morrowind immediately has going for it is that it's the first Elder Scrolls game where you can become a proper hoarder and just steal everything in sight. I cannot help myself, I just take stuff, I'm sorry. Speaking of stealing, lockpicking in this game requires you to equip a lockpick and use it directly on what you're trying to open. The map in this game is pretty big, especially considering that this is the first 3D Elder Scrolls game. The game map has a local and a world option, but the local option has a fog of war that you have to manually uncover by exploring. Morrowind introduces some of the cool stuff that you find in later Elder Scrolls games, like companions and random events like an assassin attacking you randomly on the road. You also have these super interactive quests where you get to make decisions that aren't always black and white. I had a quest where a guy told me a witch stole his gear, but most importantly his axe. He joined me and we found the witch. Once we ran into her, instead of killing her, I could have taken her side and defeated the guy I was helping. Instead, I chose to take his side. We defeated the witch and I got him his axe back. To thank me, he gave me a stat boost. Unfortunately for him, I still wanted the axe, so naturally I killed him and got a shiny new axe. Exploration in this game is great, but it is kind of hampered by the way the world is presented. Due to what I assume are technical limitations, you're always surrounded by this oppressive fog, and you're unable to fully appreciate the environment around you. Of course, there are mods to mitigate this, but I wanted to get as close to the vanilla experience as possible. I do quickly need to mention movement. Running in this game at early levels is painfully slow. There is a sprint that you can do, but it uses your stamina. Yeah, you can keep sprinting after you're out of stamina, but then you have no stamina. Also, jumping in this game is just janky. Most things seem like they don't want you jumping on them. It's hard to explain, but you kind of just slide off of things that you should, in theory, be able to jump onto. You do get a higher jump as you increase your acrobatics, but it's still a really big nuisance at the beginning. Outside of the fog thing, this is a really pretty game with some pretty varied landscapes. I found myself slowing down to take in some of the cooler looking locations because the style is still great and has aged pretty decently. I also need to add that this is the first game in the series to allow you to control your character entirely from the third person. I personally am not a fan of doing doing that, but it is still cool that you have the option. Returning from Daggerfall is the ability to create spells, though this time you can only do it using spells you've already acquired. You can also enchant items and use soul gems to capture the souls of things that you've killed. Stuff like that is really fun, and honestly, the only real difference between Morrowind from modern games is the visuals, and I guess the combat. The combat in Morrowind feels kind of mashy? Like, your character is just kind of flailing their arms until the thing they're hitting dies. As I gained experience, it felt slightly better, but I could never shake that flailing feeling. Plus, it feels like equipping a shield just blocks attacks automatically. There's no control over it. There's no key to pull up your shield. I already mentioned spells, but as far as combat goes, using them is also sorta clunky. All these things that are just kind of clunky add up though, and make the whole experience just feel really janky overall. One thing I will give to Morrowind is that the music is fantastic. I do have a slight nitpick though. The music that plays in the overworld as you're exploring is very energetic at all times. It's never really atmospheric or anything, it's just kinda ever-present theme songs. It's a weird nitpick, I know, but there's a reason I'm pointing this out that I'll get to in the later games. Overall, Morrowind is pretty much the first game in the series that feels like it's a true Elder Scrolls game, at least gameplay-wise. It's clearly more primitive than Oblivion or Skyrim, but the DNA is definitely there. It's not my favorite Elder Scrolls game, but it is definitely still a great game almost 20 years later. The Elder Scrolls Oblivion. My first Elder Scrolls game. This game absolutely blew my mind when it came out. I'd go to my friend's house and we'd sit there and screw around with stealing, assassinations, all kinds of stuff. Plus, the modding scene for this game was huge and putting stuff like force powers from Star Wars, and it was just mind-blowing, and it really did add almost infinite replay value to this game. This game, as is tradition, pumps up the production value even more. The introduction is fully pre-rendered, and the soundtrack is as vibrant and majestic as ever. Character creation in Oblivion is significantly more in-depth than previous entries. Instead of just choosing a head and moving on, there's all kinds of stuff you can customize, down to the shape of your jaw. The creation here is actually spread out in such a way that you're almost all the way done with the first dungeon before you even choose your birth sign. I will say, people's faces in this game look odd. You eventually get used to it, but they all have this weird oblong mannequin look to them. Eventually, you choose your class or create a custom class. Once you've done that, you're on your way. Oblivion also bucks the trend of forcing you to wear certain armor for certain classes. I know I didn't mention this before, but Morrowind and games before that wouldn't let you wear any armor you wanted. It had to be the armor for your class. In Oblivion, you can wear and level up any armor regardless of the class that you choose, which is a great way to allow for more player agency. So you start out in a prison, and the game walks you through how to escape, going over basic game features and teaching you how to properly engage in combat and how to lockpick. Lockpicking in Oblivion is a lot more interactive this time. You have to set the pins and then engage the lock. It's not super challenging, but it's still better than just equipping a lockpick and hoping it works. While we're breaking the law, this game is infamous for its fun law-breaking mechanics. When you're caught breaking a law, a guard will confront you.
Stop! You violated the law. Pay the court a fine or serve your sentence. Your stolen goods are now forfeit.
You have the option to pay the fine and have all your stolen goods forfeit, resist arrest and attempt to fight off the guards, or simply serve your sentence. When you serve your sentence, you can either sleep through the whole sentence or you can try to escape. Sleeping through your sentence unfortunately lowers your skill points. Escaping, while hard, does not. Honestly, the best thing to do in my opinion is to just have enough money to pay the fine. This game's environments are beautiful. The art style has aged well in most places, and the way you can kind of interact with the environment thanks to the physics is just so enjoyable to experience. The addition of physics is probably one of the biggest things that set Oblivion apart from previous games. Sometimes you'll see enemy traps like tripwires, but at the same time, the enemies can actually disarm them for you if you play your cards right. There's so much fun interactivity in this game, and of course, the third-person camera returns. I mainly used it while on horseback, but it is a nice feature to have again. But getting back to the physics system, it also allows for you to be able to pick up items and move things around. This is a lot of fun and really just adds to the immersion. The game map is pretty huge, and they've added back in fast travel so getting around is painless. I still found myself taking in a lot of the scenery though, because even all these years later, it looks so good. Finding a city nestled over a hill and exploring inside, meeting all the NPCs, that's the Bethesda magic at work. Of course, the elephant in the room is that this game is called Oblivion. At a certain point in the main quest, you start to encounter gates to a realm called Oblivion. Oblivion basically looks like hell and is this game's version of hell. It's a really cool, detailed place, and I love the names of the locations inside Oblivion. Oblivion is its own separate thing from the main world map, but it's a really cool aesthetic on its own. Oblivion is the first game in the series to have a dynamic NPC life cycle thing. What I'm trying to say is NPCs have their own schedules in this game. They go to bed, wander around, etc. Unlike Morrowind, they're not just standing around in one spot forever. Daggerfall kinda sorta had this, but the townspeople you can interact with just kind of wandered aimlessly. Here, they have specific places they go and routines they follow every day. Sometimes, they'll even leave the town entirely. It's super cool and something we kinda take for granted in games nowadays. There's a thing that I think is new to Oblivion, in that when you attack enemies, blood gets on your weapons. If this was in Morrowind, I definitely didn't notice it. It's a nice touch, and is yet another thing that adds immersion to this game. Oblivion also has this unique new mechanic that's only in Oblivion. Every NPC you talk to can be persuaded to like you. In order to play this minigame, you have to use 4 different actions: joke, coerce, boast, and admire. Different NPCs like different things. The way it works is this wheel starts out in a random spot. The goal is to try to maximize how often you put the big slices on the actions the NPC likes. Because the slices are random every time, it's hard sometimes to juggle them. Sometimes an NPC might hate it when you joke with them, and you're forced to use a big slice on joking, which will drop your persuasion with them. Overall, it's a fun mechanic to increase your trust with the NPCs, but I feel like it can also kind of be cheesed after a while. However, the persuasion also affects haggling. You can haggle with shopkeepers to attempt to increase the price you can sell for and lower the buy prices, but the shopkeepers don't always accept the offers. Combat in Oblivion is a gigantic step up from Morrowind. The enemies actually feel like you're hitting them, partly and thanks to the physics system where bodies are able to be knocked around. You can also manually use the shield to block, which feels way more responsive. Casting spells is immensely more fulfilling here. Click which spell you want to equip, use the spell hotkey to cast it. No fuss, no problems. The clunkiness is completely gone. While I'm on the topic of spells, spellmaking is back, so that's cool. You do have to do a bunch of prerequisites for the Mages Guild though. Movement in Oblivion is way better than Morrowind too, let me tell you. You can now sprint at any time for as long as you want, and it's not attached to stamina. Jumping also feels way more natural. It's a solid overall improvement. It was definitely needed. The music in Oblivion is fantastic, as is tradition. However, an improvement over Morrowind is the use of ambient music. Rather than just loud anthems playing constantly, the music is moody and atmospheric at times, but always picking up when the action gets really intense. Morrowind kinda sorta had this, but the music didn't always feel like it fit the mood or area you were in. Oblivion has it down pat though. Oblivion is a fantastic game, even by modern standards. I cannot stress enough how good this game is. It's usually overshadowed these days by Skyrim, but it's still worth going back to. Oblivion is a game I personally come back to all the time. If you haven't played Oblivion and you're a fan of Skyrim, definitely give Oblivion a shot. I bet you'd love it. Well, here it is, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Out of every game I played for this video, this is probably the one a lot of you are most familiar with. It came out all the way back in 2011, but it continues to see re-releases to this day. In fact, right before I started recording this video was the 10th anniversary of Skyrim, and Bethesda released a new anniversary edition to celebrate. In this video though, I'll be playing the original 2011 version with no mods or changes, so we can see exactly how people played it on release day. Right off the bat, on the title screen, Skyrim's music blows me away. The title screen isn't even anything crazy, but the music more than makes up for it. It's got this epic quality where you know you're about to drop into something special. The intro to this game is iconic.
Hey, you're finally awake.
You're in a wagon, chained and headed for certain death in Helgen. The townsfolk watch in morbid curiosity the events they assume are about to unfold. But just in the nick of time, a bittersweet miracle strikes and a dragon attacks Helgen. And yeah, this game has a lot of dragons. First off, as is tradition, you create your character, customize your appearance, the works. Fortunately, Skyrim's characters are a massive step up visually from Oblivion's. They no longer look weird and mannequin-like. In every Elder Scrolls game before Skyrim, the map, equipment, journal, and everything else you needed a menu for was all in a series of windows that you would flip between. In Skyrim, the menus are broken apart in such a way that it's not so cluttered. Some people don't like the Skyrim menus because they do work best for a controller, but I'm still partial to them. Either way, there's plenty of mods to customize the menu if that's something you want to do. The menu is broken down into skills, items, map, and magic. The items menu is about what you'd expect. Items are broken down into categories and you can equip or use them from there. But a cool little thing you can do now is see a 3D render of every item. This is actually sometimes used to to complete puzzles, like the Bleak Falls Barrow Golden Claw quest, where the claw has the solution to the puzzle on it. The magic menu works a lot like the item menu, but for spells. But I'll get to spells later. Skyrim's world map is the absolute bar for what a world map should be in open world games. It's fully 3D rendered and super detailed. You can get an idea for where you're going and for what you need to prepare just by hovering around the map. You can also set a custom waypoint if you like. But for real, I love Skyrim's map, and I hope the next Elder Scrolls game does something similar or something that's at least as good as this. In the menu, skills show you a list of skill constellations and their perk trees. The number by the skill is your overall skill level, and clicking on the skill opens up the perk tree. When you level up, skills changes to level up, and you can choose to increase health, magic, or stamina. Then you're given the points you need to unlock the perks. The perks are super neat, and there's a ton of them. Under lockpicking, for example, there's a perk that increases your chance of finding treasure in locked chests. Or under restoration, there's a perk that makes healing spells restore stamina as well. Skyrim took Oblivion's player agency when it came to specializing your class to the next level. Lockpicking in Skyrim is a bit different in that you're rotating the lockpick inside of the lock this time, and testing to see how far you can turn the lock. It's basically just fiddling and trying not to break the lockpick by putting too much stress on it. I like this lockpicking better than Oblivion's because there's nothing like finding a really hard lock and just barely being able to pick it. Combat is similar to Oblivion on the surface, but differs in a few key ways. First, every weapon now has a chance of giving you a takedown animation when you defeat an enemy. This includes spells. This is a nice touch that makes you feel super cool for getting that last shot out on an enemy or a hunted animal. Then there's the dragon shouts. Sometimes you'll find a dragon rune. The rune teaches you a word of power. From there, you can learn more words, and each word has a different effect. However, you can't learn a word until you've acquired a dragon soul. There's plenty of dragons to fight in Skyrim, and when you kill a dragon, you absorb its soul because you are the dragonborn. Once you get a dragon soul, you can unlock a word. It's pretty straightforward. The shouts have their own cooldown, but otherwise are pretty great supplements to any combat style. They're not all offensive either. They're basically just glorified spells. One of them shoots a ring of fire, while another can clear bad weather. There's even a shout that slows down time. There's a pretty huge variety, and it's a lot of fun collecting them. Spells in Skyrim are overhauled from previous games, but it's definitely an improvement. You now equip spells from your spell menu, kind of like Oblivion, but your spells can now be equipped to a specific hand. So, for example, I have flames on my right hand. I shoot flames. Simple enough, right? But watch what happens when I equip it to both my left and right hands. Super cool, right? Stronger spells have cooler effects when you combine them too, and it's fun to test out spell combinations just to see what they look like. Just to note though, combining a spell requires you to unlock the dual casting perk for that skill type. Otherwise, you just use the skill separately in both hands. You can also dual wield spells and weapons as long as your weapon isn't two-handed. You can be a literal spell sword. Movement in Skyrim is the best the series has to offer so far. I'm using a keyboard, so I'm gonna talk in keyboard terms. You can walk or run depending on whether or not you're holding the walk key down, but additionally, there's a sprint that uses stamina. It's the best of both worlds from previous games. You can move quickly right at the beginning, but you can still work towards increasing your stamina so you can sprint longer. Skyrim unfortunately did away with spell making, but it did add smithing. You can now harvest raw ores to smelt and craft armor and weapons. You can use the tanning rack to tan hides you harvest from animals, and from there you can use the leather to make gear. If you use the smithing table, you can upgrade your gear and make it more powerful using your raw materials. There's always something new you can do with the smithing. It's a cool system, and while it might seem like something super simple nowadays, back in 2011 this was something totally fresh. I honestly am okay with spellmaking dying for this because crafting weapons and armor that you can either use or sell is a lot more fun to me. Skyrim also added cooking, but you could essentially do the same thing back in Oblivion, albeit as alchemy to make potions using ingredients. That being said, I like the idea of being able to create foods that are actually foods a little bit better. Skyrim's visuals are the best in the series, not just because of the advance in technology through the years, but the setting and art direction too. Skyrim, the place, is a snowy wooded territory, and the entire aesthetic just feels rustic and buried in nature. Unlike Morrowind, which was swampy and foggy, Skyrim has everything from rushing rivers to giant mountains. You see those mountains? You can climb those mountains. The music is also fantastic and the absolute peak of the series. Every single song perfectly fits the locale. The cities feel rustic and welcoming, nature feels serene, and the fights feel intense. There are not a lot of games that use music like Skyrim does. I sometimes actually listen to the Skyrim soundtrack soundtrack when I need background music for tedious tasks, just because of how soothing and nice it is. The music for Skyrim is just top notch, and I hope that whoever ends up composing the music for the next Elder Scrolls game is able to match the absolute heights that Skyrim's music reached. I could go on for hours about Skyrim, and I'd only be scratching the surface. There's so many things to discover. The game is a gargantuan game, and there's very few games that have matched its scale even today. Overall, Skyrim is a masterpiece, and I think it holds up 100% to this day, and I'm talking about the 2011 version. I don't think there will ever be a day where Skyrim isn't a must-play if you like the genre. If you somehow haven't played Skyrim, definitely give it a shot, especially now that there's thousands of mods, and you can tailor the experience however you like. Fortunately though, the game holds up incredibly well without any mods too. Really quickly, I wanted to show you guys some of my favorite comments from my last video. Check it out. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching and supporting the channel. My channel is growing at an explosive rate, but I am still a pretty small creator. I would really appreciate it if you guys could subscribe to my channel if you want to see more stuff like this. By the way, I do know that there were a bunch of Elder Scrolls spin-off games that I didn't get to in this video, and if you'd like to see me play those, let me know in the comments. And if there's anything else you want to see me play, also let me know in the comments. I read every comment you guys post. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.